We were first put on to Joe when we had our conversation with Russell Targ, who was one of the founders with Hal Puthoff of the SRI Institute back in 1971, I think, or 72, where they started to run a research lab on remote viewing. And Joe here was psychic spy number one. Is that right, Joe?
Correct. Yes. Mhm.
And to throw everybody off the scent, they called the second spy like number 358 or something, right?
They realized they were going to tell everybody how many spies there were, so they named him, I think, 385 or 365, something like that.
For the listeners here, Joe is the most successful remote viewer ever, and we'll go through his experiences. He's got a lot to share, and because of this, I've been deeply grateful for the time that we spent. Uh, so here we go. So there are two statements, Joe. You let me know that you give before your talks. The first one is history is always written by the winner. Do you remember the second one?
No, I don't.
The second statement you told me was, if something happens historically that doesn't fit the narrative or what the narrative is, it doesn't get recorded.
That's correct. They don't even want to talk about it.
So that's your experience, I suppose.
Yeah, it's always been my experience. Um, in fact, in many cases, when you provide the truth, like a photograph or something like that, they'll question it and say, "Oh no, that's not a tank track. That looks a lot more like a bulldozer track. You ought to go back to school and learn the difference." And then you have to go photograph the tanks to show that it's not a bulldozer track. It's craziness, but that's what people do because they don't believe it.
So we spend a lot of time on this podcast talking about the difficulty in general to chip away, question, break beliefs. Why do you think that's the case?
I think it has more to do with what's been hammered into somebody over a lengthy period of time in terms of the limits that they believe things are capable of. A prime example would be the Wright brothers when they flew their little part glider, part plane. They actually moved it to a field across the river, the Potomac, from the where the U.S. Army was located, because they had hopes of selling a few to the Army. And the Army took a little while to go across the Potomac to watch it flown. You know what that little while was? 9 years, because they absolutely knew it could not be possibly true.
You know, when we first learned about the psychic spy program, like the government would even have something like this. Like, obviously, we're talking about this program here run by Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff. All we did was just we stepped back and we said, okay, I mean, this is the case. Why don't we just reach out to the people who are part of this and just learn?
The problem was that psychic functioning or using psychics was looked upon as well. They probably guess sometimes. They sometimes provide lots of information that's totally useless, and that's true in many cases. But historically, psychics were never important to anybody within any logically minded or driven government. So what happened in the Army is that the Army, when they see something that might be true, even remotely, what they will do is they'll study it to see what the threat might be, the threat level. And if there seems to be a threat level there to the security of the nation, then they'll study it. They'll do perhaps a 2 or 3 year study on it, where they find people who can do that, and they'll release them to target our own places like the White House, the Pentagon, places like that, and then have them turn in all the materials, and they'll hand those materials over to like an independent agency and said, how much of this is good? How much of this is bad? And if it's predominantly good stuff, it's a threat. And so then they'll do something dynamic to address it. In the case of the remote viewing effort, uh, the first thing they did was pile up a whole lot of psychic stuff, everything from anecdotal newspaper clippings to released documents, whatever. And they wanted to know what people felt about it. So they brought intelligence people in, a few. I happened to be one of them. And they asked us to review that pile of material for a while. And we did. I did. And at the end, they said, do you think there's a threat in all of that? And I said, my exact answer was, most of it's garbage. But I think some of it in there should be looked at because it could possibly be a threat. And that was mostly science data. So they thanked me and I left. And it turned out that they were asking because of the experiments that were being done at SRI International. And so the next thing they did is we went out there and made contact with those folks. And I ended up being recruited as one of the first people to use the remote viewing technique for collecting intelligence.
And this is in 1975?
1978, October of 78 is precisely the date that I reviewed that material for the first time.
So not to go through all of your military experience, because I had a long listen as well to the Sean Ryan show where you were on. Your episode was like 6 hours, but you were really steeped in a military career before all of this.
By the time this came around, I was probably 15 years, 16 years into my service period. Maybe a little shorter, 15 years, something like that.
Did you believe that you had psychic abilities before 1978?
No, I thought that perhaps I was luckier than most. Every once in a while, I'd make a decision that was probably based more on air than reality. But I did things sometimes because they felt like the right thing to do under that particular circumstance. So people watching me would have said, yeah, he's psychic, but I wouldn't have called myself psychic.
So you told me last time we spoke, you said we need psychic abilities to survive. When you go into the army, you use these kinds of skills, like firemen, surgeons, and policemen who also use these kinds of skills. Are you referring to intuition?
Yeah, basically what you instinctively feel you need to do in life and death circumstance. You obviously aren't trained for all of those circumstances, and you have no time to make a phone call or read a book or anything. Even ask somebody standing next to you. You just have to make that decision extremely quickly, and usually it's because I'm still here, it's the right one. Here's the point. Every human being has the capacity for this, but they usually don't recognize it because they don't live a lot of their life under threat. Police officers do, military does, surgeons certainly aren't under threat, but they have things that occur in a surgical suite that they can't call somebody and ask about, or they can't look it up in the medical journal. They have to make a decision right there, and it may be the one that saves a patient's life. And a really good surgeon depends on his capacity to do that, nothing else. And I would say that's being pretty psychic.
I've mentioned her on the podcast before. We had a past guest. Her name is Ia Whiteley, and she's a space psychologist. And part of her expertise is that one of the focus of her expertise is that she studies professional intuition, and specifically with pilots and with astronauts, but she uses the example of surgeons as well. And she talks about how surgeons, they're trained in a certain way, but they use their intuition to go above and beyond the training that they have. Like they go sometimes against the training that they've had because of their experience, but always linked to their intuition.
A really good example. I know of a surgeon who he was one of a handful of surgeons in a hospital who agreed to try to help a patient who came in with uh, plaque in their their vein here. It- yeah, if it broke loose, it would go to the brain. He would probably die almost instantly. So they put him in the surgical suite, and the surgeon went in with all the other people, the nurses, everybody, and they had him on this small, low grade, I guess, X-ray thing where they could actually see this piece of flak down at the bottom of the carotid artery. And it was just kind of fluttering there in the flow of blood. And right about that time, they were going to try to open up his neck and take this piece of flak out or whatever it was. Right about that time, it broke loose. And everybody in the room just kind of went, oh, that kind of thing. And the surgeon did what no one else on the planet would have done. He cut his throat just with a scalpel, and that piece of garbage in his blood hit the wall, probably, knowing the force of blood through the carotid artery. And then he closed him up and saved his life. I think that's a remarkable example of doing something that's counterintuitive.
Do you think that when the surgeon is working against his training, he's also working against his egoic self?
But I don't think they're even thinking about it. I think it's a direct message, probably from the subconscious, that says, do this. And they just do it automatically because they have sort of this, they built up this over time, many surgeries, probably this trust between themselves and what they intuitively feel is the right thing to do. So that they make all of their decisions in that way in emergency conditions. Any other time, they'll follow the book, the schedule, all that kind of stuff. People in the military do the same thing. Um, you really see it with special ops people. You see it with EOD people who disarm mines and things. They can't afford to make a single mistake. Uh, and many of them don't survive, but some do for long periods of time and walk away in one piece. And it's because they count on what this is telling them, nothing else. Everything else is subservient to what this says.
You shared with me a story right before this record. Do you remember what you shared with me? Being stuck in a tree?
I was in radio recon, and radio recon was exceptionally dangerous because we carried special equipment for, I guess you would say, SIGINT purposes. And in some cases, you had to be within so many thousand meters of what you were looking for. And the problem with it was supposed to be man portable, but it wasn't because the batteries for that equipment were extremely heavy. So you get into a position which was totally indefensible, and suddenly the folks you were targeting would appear, and you'd have to camouflage it all. Well, I needed to know where I was because that particular area was heavily treed, and it was more canopy of jungle there than anywhere I'd been before. Central Highlands of Vietnam. And so I said, I'm going to climb this tree and see if I can get a higher view of where I am. So I went up this tree, and at some point I guess it was about the second canopy, I started smelling a cooking fire, and of course that made me worried. So I looked around, and probably not 100 yards out to my front were all these little fires, and the an NVA unit had stopped, and they were cooking their rice. And then I froze. I knew if I came down the tree, I would probably not be as careful coming down as when I went up, and they'd know I was there. And of course, I had two people on the ground with all the equipment. So I duct taped myself to the tree, and I spent about 14 hours up in this tree. And when they left, no one had ever looked up. And I think that was the right thing to do then, but it's very difficult being in a tree for 14 hours. We went into an area where we were taken in by helicopter, and we were going to unload our equipment and move it into this tree line. And it had been scouted earlier, and it was supposed to be devoid of anyone. And when we arrived, we unloaded a couple of the people with some equipment, and they opened fire on us. And everybody had to get out of the helicopter in a hurry. We just left the equipment. We took our basic basic weapons and whatnot, and exited the helicopter as fast as we could, because the helicopter was taking some pretty tough hits, and it was juking around is what it was doing, and you couldn't go out the one side because it was a hill. You had to go out the other side, and when I went out the other side, I went out so fast I hooked my right heel of my boot on the sked on the way out, and fell flat on my face, which is fine, but my face was in this muck. And the next guy out put both his boots on the back of my head and just ground me into the muck. And so when I pulled my head up, I could hear bullets singing by me, and I couldn't see. I had mostly mud, but I had broken my nose, so my nose was bleeding profusely. And all I could do was hear these voices going, "Joe, here, Joe, here." So I got up on all fours and then sprinted, just took off running at the voices as fast as I could, and ran smack into a tree and definitely broke my nose. So by the time the day was over, I was wearing cigarette filters and stuff stuffed up my nose. I had a problem with that with my nose for a long time because I had a bone shard sticking up on one side, and nobody would fix it.
But that's not all with that story. Like they found you in the jungle the day after, right?
No, that actually was when I was in the hospital, and when I was in the helicopter in Pleiku City. We were landing. We were coming in off of, we loaded all our equipment on the helicopter, and we were flying back into Pleiku City, and as we were making our run into the airport, it was so hot there, helicopters had to partially fly and like a plane when they took off and landed. Not very far, but just enough to maintain altitude because the air was so thin on days when it was really, really hot. And so we're making our landing, and they waved us off. They said, "Brake right," or something like that. "There's a cargo plane coming in behind you." And it's a huge, I think it was a C-130 or a Starlifter or something. It was coming in really, really flying hard. And so we broke right. We went out over the trees, which was a mistake. But the trees, it was cooler. So we opened the doors and we just hovered there for a minute, waiting for the plane to land and clear the runway. And as luck would have it, old Chuck popped up out of the bush and hit us with an RPG, a rifle propelled grenade, and the helicopter fireballed, and it was right at dusk. And the forward listening post at the airport reported that there were probably no survivors because it was this beautiful fireball right at dusk. And what happened in actuality is it blew everybody out of the helicopter because we had all the doors open. I think one person, it might have been the co-pilot, was still in the bird when it crashed. And anyway, I felt I was knocked out by it, but I woke up on the ground, so I had fallen probably 80 to 100 feet through the trees and landed in a sitting position, which compression fractured my spine and some of my, well, probably all of my joints, major joints. So I was in this like shocking pain when I tried to move. So I rolled over, just kept rolling until I was up under these bushes and couldn't get to my equipment or anything. So I was just laying under these bushes all night while the VC or whoever they were walking around in the brush looking for us. The next day they came in to recover the helicopter, and that's when they found me and took me to a MASH unit, and I was in traction for 3 weeks.
There is another story that you mentioned, and I know you mentioned it obviously in the Sean Ryan show, but I need you to share this one here. And it's about a story about someone or something entering your room at night.
Oh yeah. Oh my God. I remember that. Um, I was I was up in way up in northern Thailand, right off the Mekong River. Was assigned to a unit up in Udon Thani, north actually north north of Udon Thani city in Thailand. So I was living in a small village. It was called Nung Gai, and it was about a mile from the Mekong River and right across the river from Vientiane. And we did a lot of things up there. I think at the time was headquarters for a lot of the intelligence going on. And the hut I was in was I was I was renting this hut with a gardener, a guard, a maid, and a cook for and the hut for I think it was $28 a month. And but this hut was 18 feet off the ground, and you had to go up through a ladder through a center hole in the hut, which had a pin that went through a lock. So you could pull the ladder up at night, close the trap door, put a pin through it, and you were basically cut off from the world. And underneath were pigs. They pinned pigs underneath the huts because there were great alarm systems. If anybody disturbed a pig at night, it would wake them up. And so I'm up there sleeping on a pad, and I kept a shotgun. It was a combat shotgun. It had, I think, 8 rounds and one in the chamber. And I had it, there was a cross beam right by my face where I was laying on this pad on the floor. And you couldn't see it if you were seeing me laying there. And you know how you wake up in the middle of the night, you just have this feeling something's in the room with you? And I did that. I had a little candle next to me on my right. That was just in case I had to get up in the middle of the night. I didn't want to fall or anything. And I sensed something was in the room. So I pretended to keep sleeping. I kept my breathing constant and my eyes closed. And I made this whole plan. The only way something could be in the room with me is if it was a bandit or something like that. So my whole plan was I would partially sit up, take the shotgun off the pins above me, tuck it into my body, roll to the right, and snuff out the candle, and whatever was in the room with me, I would shoot it. And so in the shotgun, I kept a solid slug, triple X, solid slug, triple X, alternate rounds. And so I did that. I snatched the shotgun. As I rolled to the right, might have already had the shell in the chamber. But I rolled to the right and put the candle out and sat up. And at the foot of my pad, up against the wall, was this huge, what appeared to be a human, covered in hair, I would add. Um, so I shot at it. I hit it center mass, right in the chest. And it dropped to one knee and then stood back up. And I said, in my mind, I was thinking, oh, what the hell kind of body armor is this thing wearing? and it, and so I shot at it again, and I'm sure I hit it with the triple X. And it ran to its right to this open balcony. Now, this is 18 feet off the ground. So I got up and I went to the center of the room and I shot it a third time as it was going over the balcony. And I don't know if I hit it or not that time. But I went to the balcony to look over, intending to see a body laying at the bottom. And this, whatever it was, this guy or whatever, was up and running across the open area for the jungle. And that's when all the pigs went nuts, and the villagers showed up with torches and their own guns and things. And we couldn't track it because there was no blood trail or anything. And they had a name for it. I can't remember the name now, but it was this mythological being that would do the dirty work for anybody that fed it something. I don't know much about that, but anyway, that was the entire event, and I always wondered, is that a human being in a hairy suit that's also body armor? And if so, I want the body armor. I want to know what it's made out of. But um, later, I had a talk with a man, and when I say later, that happened in around 1975, and I talked with a man in 1998 who was at the Monroe Institute where I was teaching remote viewing. And he told me, he was a cryptozoologist, and he told me that they had found a number of insects and animals in Southeast Asia since the war ended. And it was very cool talking to him. And he said, but there was an incident that occurred way up in northern Thailand, just off the Mekong River. I don't think it was the same village. That's not my memory, but he said that he was awakened in the middle of the night, sleeping in a canvas tent with his assistant or his friend, and his friend was choking, and that's what woke him up. And when he looked over, there was this giant, hairy, man-like thing on top of his friend in his cot, choking him. And so he shot him with a gun he kept in his boot. It just pumped 2 rounds into the side, and he fell over and got up and ran out of the tent. And of course, it woke up the paramilitary police who were escorting them. And they chased it and fired at it. But it went over 3 rolls of concertina wire like it wasn't even there. And the next day, there was a blood trail, and they tracked it to a small village. He said it was about 8 kilometers away. And the headman said, when they asked him if anybody in the village was seriously hurt, he said he had heard that his medicine man was hurt, his shaman. And so they went to the shaman's hut, and the man was dying from a bullet wound in his side. And he was about 80 years old, bald as a cucumber, and very, very fragile looking. So I don't know about that story. It's like I want to go back and trap it, you know, go back and find out what the heck this thing is. But what did happen is his friend, who was being choked, actually tore some hair out of this thing with his hands, and they sent the hair to the lab and had it analyzed. That's what they do with the animals anyway, and it came back as non-specific dog. So crazy, absolutely crazy.
Yeah, I would say the same, but what do you make of it? I mean, you shared it. You must make something of it.
You know, I've learned in my life there's a lot of bizarre and strange things that happen, and you don't necessarily by observing them get all the information. Um, yeah, I honestly don't know how to answer it. I would not make assumptions based on it, but I would certainly like to go back and trap it and get some answers that way. Uh, you know, even with remote viewing as an example, you can't have 10 perfectly successful remote viewings answer a bizarre, out of the way question and call it proof. Proof is perhaps 1,000 remote viewings done in 3 labs by different scientists with all different participants, and an analysis maybe by an independent lab or a statistician, and then actual facts written about it. And that would be an indication it needed to be studied, because then you need to figure out why it happens, how it happens, all that kind of stuff. And that's basically what the science of remote viewing has been about for, golly, 50 years. They've amassed 1.8 million words of science that supports remote viewing. We still don't know what the source of the capability is, where it happens, how it happens, why it happens. We don't know any of that because it seems to violate time space, and it makes it a lot more difficult to study.
We've had a bunch of remote viewers here on the podcast over the last few years. We've had obviously Russell Targ, you know personally, Lynn Buchanan, Stefan Schwartz, Nancy Duterre, Paul Smith, some of whom came into the program obviously after you, and some whom you've trained and you've worked with in the past as well. And they've all given their definition of remote viewing, their take on remote viewing. Can I ask you to give your definition of remote viewing for the listeners?
Okay, I'm going to give you the protocoled answer. Now, protocol is different from methodology. Methodology can be anything. You could stand on your head in a tub of mud, breathing air through a straw in your left nostril, whispering Dixie. And if you can produce a fact that's relative to a very defined and needed response to some problem, that would be remote viewing, but only, and I caution everybody, only if the remote viewer and everybody in the room is completely, totally blind to the target. If they can't demonstrate that with a target in a sealed, double wrapped, opaque envelope, or a target where somebody has gone somewhere and you have absolutely no idea where they went, and everybody in the room with the remote viewer is completely blind to those facts, that's remote viewing. But I will tell you that most people doing remote viewing today don't follow that protocol. That protocol was established in 1972 at SRI International, and it's the very reason why everybody got interested in it. The extant proof for remote viewing today has always been done within that protocol. It remote viewing is pretty much designed on the fact that it's probably something like a survival mechanism. And in order to get information from it, the information you want to get has to be something that's absolutely necessary to answer a problem, a specific problem. Life and death problems almost every time get answered and answered properly. But it's usually one or two facts that nobody knows that everybody needs to know in order to answer the problem. The idea that a remote viewer sits down and draws something in absolute perfection, starts out with a few scribbly lines, and at the end draws a perfect picture of the target, in all probability, it's cheating. And I say that because in an entire career of tens of thousands of remote viewings, I would say I actually physically saw the target maybe 7 times. Very seldom ever see the target. Even when it appears in my drawings that I did. Because in my drawings, if you were to compare them to a photograph of the target, you'll find that very little in detail is correct. It's the layout of the drawing, the parts and pieces that are general and put together in some pattern that remind people that's the way they saw it at some point.
So let me interject with an example you gave me with one of the first times, or from one of the first times that we spoke. You remote viewed. It was, you said it was like it looked like a tripod, and it took you a while to figure out that it wasn't a tripod, that it was the outline of the inside of a box.
It was the inside or outside corner of an empty box. Yeah. Remember the old peace sign that they wore on their jackets during the Vietnam era when people were demonstrating with the circle around it? Well, just remove the circle. It's that symbol, that sort of triangular symbol with a point at the top. That was my target. That was the response I got.
You say it's not about what you see, and you have to take yourself away from supposing things. How do you take yourself away from supposing things? Because that's a natural inclination, I guess. I mean, we can assume it is. Most of us understand that's what it'd be. That's how we exist. I mean, maybe that's even how we survive. But how do you take yourself out of supposing things when you see things?
Well, I'm gonna tell you one of the major secrets to teaching remote viewing that nobody ever pays any attention to. It's not about learning anything new. What it's about is destroying the habits that you've developed since birth. We have a habit that we don't see something completely, but we'll make a great deal of assumptions about it and think we're speaking truth when we remember what we saw. When in fact, personal identifications by human beings in a 13-second event are almost never in agreement. Everybody saw something different. Everybody saw it in a different way. Everybody leaps to a conclusion about it. So everybody says something different about it. But which one do you believe? Who's true to the truth and who's not? That's the problem, that nobody is. If you understand that the mind is trapped inside this box, okay, then the use of the eyes, the nose, the ears, the senses, the taste, all of that is a system by which we make very complicated, very real decisions about what's around us, what's going on around us, all those things. They're affected by where you've been born, your culture, how you've been brought up, what your mystical beliefs are, what your reality beliefs are, what your minister has told you. Every single teacher you had ever had in your life tells you all these things, and all of your conclusions, without exception, are usually made without a full background of facts on whatever the question was. They're assumptions that you've leaped to based on your experience, your ability to recall things from textbooks, what people have told you has to happen when you put A, B, and C together, those kinds of things. Remote viewing is different. It's made up of a sense system that is completely remote to all of those things. But all of those things are used to translate it. So it's in that translation that the problems occur. So the subconscious will give you, has total access to everything, will give you whatever you need to make those correct opinions about something. The problem is it has no language of its own. So it borrows from the conscious mind and it uses things that it can find very rapidly by going through your memory system, your feelings, your understandings, your beliefs, all those things. It presents you with something that's remotely similar. So now you have to figure out, why did I get that? What makes me jump to that conclusion? It takes a long time and a lot of experience to try to tear that apart for every single thing you perceive and make something out of it that's of value. And that thing of value has to bring to fore the exact answer to a problem that nobody knows the answer to. But when it's inserted, it's a key. It answers everything. So uh, the police may need to know which door do we use in an apartment building with 6 entries? Which door do we use that will guarantee the safety of the hostage? Just knowing that alone may be what's absolutely critical in the survival of a hostage. They don't know the answer to that. They know everything else. They know what the people that took the hostage look like. They know how they're armed. They know what the hostage looks like. They know who it is. They know all this stuff, but they don't know which is the best entry. Now, giving them a perfect description of everything, does that help? No. Remote viewing is designed to understand subconsciously what the actual need is and provide that very special entry. You use the entry that's got the, I don't know, rose garden planted in front of it. You can't get the smell of roses out of your mind. I just want to say that the term remote viewing is a misnomer. You don't see anything. I'm sorry, but it's not about seeing. The problem with teaching people to do remote viewing, now close your eyes. What does that do? It encourages anybody to look for something as in it's totally wrong. You keep your eyes open, you learn to think very deeply with this subconscious interaction by disassociating from everywhere you are and reassociating with only the target for every form of perception you can garner.
So you've said a few things here that I don't want to lose. I don't want the listener to lose either because I think they're pretty important. So you said that number one is a sense system. I get it. I really understand that. And then the number two, you said finding the door and smelling the roses. But it sounds like you are describing this skill set, or you're describing the importance of remote viewing to operationalize a skill set.
Absolutely a skill set.
Okay, so there are two things then that come from that, because there was one thing that you told me before the recording. I thought that was pretty cool. You said you learned remote viewing in the Army beside a 155 battery.
Yes. Oh, yeah. If you can't remote view next to a 155 battery, you can't use it anywhere in the Army because you don't know where you're going to have to use it. Under fire, out of a bunker that's totally dark, while you're running through the jungle. You don't know. You don't know where you're going to have to use it. So training somebody in the Army to use remote viewing isn't about the quietest room, the least distractive room, the erasure of sound through walls, or the elimination of chirping birds outside the window. No, it's not about any of that. It's about learning to get inside your head, disassociating from where you are and whatever's going on around you, and understanding that your subconscious can give you information outside of space time, anywhere in the past, anywhere in the future, that will answer a specific question that's being asked. And the people that are asking it don't have a clue what the answer is. Neither do you. And yet it still works. So that's the magic of remote viewing. So when people try to teach it and they say things like, well, you can't allow the subconscious to do any processing. No, as soon as it took something from the other side of your mind, it just processed something. That's not true. You can't teach it to a group very easily unless you figure out how to get people out of their entire history of assumptions all at the same time. So you got to get everybody on the same sheet of music. How would you do that? I think going to the Gestalt first is important. There's so many other things about it that are true, and most of it deals with letting go of what you normally would do and doing something you normally would not do. So there are methods for doing that. Mostly when you start out working with someone with remote viewing, you have to make them understand that you can't use anything you learned up to this time to give you an answer. You're going to have to unlearn a lot of bad habits. The idea being that the new habit you learn, the new habits you learn that constitute remote viewing have to be totally different, and they have to be done over and over and over again so they become habitual and not forced. Because if they're forced, the ego steps in and says, I'm in charge here. I will tell you how to do this.
So this requires it requires discipline, and it requires the long game. And I feel like I would shortchange myself if I just decided to learn how to remote viewing just for the sake of, like, I would want to put myself in a position where I would learn how to unlearn things over a longer period of time.
Actually, no, but I can I can teach you in 5 or 6 days how to reach a point where you can see that you're getting data about something that's impossible to get any other way. I can teach that to you, and you'll recognize it, and you'll understand this is kind of what remote viewing's like. Now, to perfect that, to get better at it, to get deeper into it, to get more detail, to get the right answer, which may be just a word or a statement, that takes practice after practice after practice. I call it the martial art of the mind. I've called it that since I retired, 1984. It's the martial art of the mind. I call it RV Doe. I even have a coffee cup around here. Yeah, I have a coffee cup around here somewhere with it. Um, it, it for a long time, people have been led to believe that it's really about you try to draw the whole thing and you try to say what it is. No, no, that's wrong. If you're going in that direction, you automatically step off the remote viewing trail. Um, I think people who have been involved in remote viewing in the military sense back when Stargate existed, I think they recognize this. The problem is how do you teach that to another human being without the kind of intensity that we went through? In the military, we were doing remote viewing practice literally 24/7. I mean, we were doing it 3 or 4 times a day, uh, tearing it apart, talking about it, dealing with it, those kinds of things. It virtually is, I would say, the most difficult thing on the planet to teach. There is no base system because depending on the flavor of the group that you might have of, say, 10 people, they all think differently. They all make conclusions differently. They all understand reality differently. So you have to like bring them in and put them on the same sheet of music first. Otherwise, it's an intensive one-on-one. That's the only way it can be taught.
Okay, so I knew this before. But also you told me before this recording, like for 38 years, you were supporting thousands of people, corporations, police departments, who wanted to leverage this skill set that you developed.
Right. Investigative services, police stations, sheriff stations, FBI. Uh, let's see, lot of people. Everything from farmers to major corporation heads, CEOs, CFOs of different corporations. In fact, I had to guarantee total anonymity to every person I've ever helped because in the case of big corporations, many of them are publicly owned. If they knew the information that was making more money for that corporation was remote viewing, they'd fire the CEO on a heartbeat because he's working with a psychic. That's insanity. They'd fire him. But I could tell them there's at least 5 corporations I worked with for over 15 years. And I told all the people I helped in big corporations that 10% of whatever profit they made from remote viewing had to be spent on a charity of their choice. And they all did. And I had 2 of those people, 2 of the CEOs of those companies come to me many years later and say, if I had known giving money away to a charity would make this much more money for me, I would have done it years ago. It's crazy.
I have no words. I mean, I get it. We live in a 3D world. I understand it. I mean, I run my own business, so it is what it is. But that's a half a world. It's like many of us are busy trying to forget it, explaining it away, or wishing it away. But it's still a half a world.
Listen, uh, when I was working for SRI International, there were some programs that were brought up in Congress. I think one of them was called the MX missile program. It was $100 billion program. Probably today it'd be a $1 trillion program, and it was canceled. And one of the reasons it was canceled is because SRI sent them a note and said, and this is the psychic unit, study unit at SRI, it won't work because it can be violated. And they proved that scientifically, and it was canceled. And as a result of it being canceled, the particular service that was going to get that money to make that happen sent a letter out. Their chief of staff sent a letter out to everybody saying, you won't eat dinner with these people. You won't let your kids play with their kids. You won't, no contact whatsoever with these crazy people. He retired and we were inundated with tasking. So, it's just plain, I don't even know what to call it. I've been called by senior congressmen, senators. I've been told I'm doing the work of the devil and I'm going to burn in the fires of hell. By other senior senators, I've been told I'm doing God's work. Keep it up. It's ridiculous. The whole thing. This is a common thing. People have this capability. It saves lives sometimes, and sometimes people don't pay attention to it and they die. So I don't know what else to say about it. I try to demonstrate it as much as I can to have an effect on the belief systems of people. But I'm only one guy, and I've been doing that for 50 years, and I'm tired. I really am.
So what kind of work do you think this is? Like, why is it that you're doing it? Why is it that you're enamored by it?
I'm not enamored by it. It's hard work, and it's very stressful. Um, if you have to imagine the kind of stress there is for, and this goes for everybody who spent any time at all in the military project, anybody who is supporting, I don't know, 12 or more intelligence agencies on life and death missions every day for years, the kind of stress they're under to provide answers. That's enormous stress. And then you do that. I've done 51 demonstrations, live, double blind demonstrations of remote viewing on national level television in 7 countries. They've all worked. Uh, the, in most cases, 20 million or plus people watching. Um, I've done at least 12 years of work in Japan finding missing people. I don't even know what the target is when they come. I have to first describe, like a missing person, I have to describe the person I'm looking for first. If I can't do that, it's a failure. And I have to describe them in detail. It could be a 14-year-old girl. It could be a 68-year-old man. It could be anybody. In one case, I think I told you about this before. In one case, it was probably one of the first missing people I did. Um, I described the man perfectly, and I said, there's a problem here. And they said, what? This is the first thing they said. He's not Japanese, he's Korean. And they said, oh, wait, we have to call Tokyo. I'm not sure they'll want you to do this one. And it came back. He was a month old as a Korean when he was adopted, taken to Japan, and raised solely as a Japanese. The only two people that knew different was his father and his Korean brother. And I I did the work from Virginia. They gave it to a detective agency. They followed my directions exactly and wound up standing in front of his burial stick, his identity stick, in a graveyard in Korea, Busan, Korea. And it turned out all those facts are true. So, I can't tell you where the information comes from. I can't tell you why I get it. All I can tell you is I have learned to achieve answers when tasked. The the entire process is nerve-wracking. The pressure is enormous. It, it it's hard to do. It's not an easy thing. You can't just walk in the door and then, I don't know, 3 days call yourself a remote viewer. It just can't be done.
So what is your theory, or do you have a theory on why it's so difficult for us to believe that this is a natural ability? Like what what is the blockage?
Here's what I think has happened. If you go back to the beginning of human, however you want to believe that happened, if you go back to the beginning of human, we came into the world and basically we're a collective family unit, like any pride of lions, pod of dolphin, group of wolves, whatever. We were sort of a pride or gathering of humans in the same family format. That family would have grown pretty big, maybe 9, 15, 20 people. And it wouldn't have lasted very long because we were hunted by predators. Now, in that format, we had no language, we couldn't even speak. What I think, when the men went out to hunt and the women went out to gather, the men in the hunting formation around an animal displayed proper hunting technique. We knew each person in that group, even though we couldn't speak, we couldn't point, we couldn't even grunt what we wanted to have done. We instinctively knew what every member of that hunting party was doing, where they were in position, what their intent was, all those things. We were practically reading each other's minds. That's the only way it could have worked, the only way we could have survived. So it's a survival mechanism. Okay, so we survived that way. And then something happens. We are gathered around our family unit. We're in a cave with a fire. We're eating what we hunted. We're eating what we gathered. And a stranger shows up from another family unit. And he looks like us, and we trust him. Because of that, we bring him into our cave and feed him. And while he's sitting there, he's got his eye on my spear because my spear is better made than his. Or he's got his eye on my woman, which is even worse. And I can read what he's thinking. I know what he's going to try to do. And it offends me, and I kill him on the spot. Well, humans aren't going to survive very long that way. So Mother Nature does what Mother Nature does over a period of time. It allows us to gather together non-family units with one family unit with another family unit by inserting a developmental filter, perhaps, somewhere in our head. That filter might be in the callosum. I don't know where it is, but it's somewhere in the mind, which says you can only use this to survive with. You're not allowed to use it for any other reason. And over time, we developed the ability to have leisure hours. We developed artistic abilities. We started growing as an entity. And in that process, we started learning more about language, and we started keeping records and libraries and all that stuff. We had teachers, shaman, whatever. But over that long period of time, humans have come to rely on things other than this. Okay, that psychic ability. It's still there. And the people who learn to use it are people who are put at risk. So where survival is absolutely necessary. Military who are at war. Even training, where training's dangerous. You can die in military training. Firemen, they have to know, when do we evacuate the building we're trying to save before the roof caves in? They instinctively know when to pull out. Surgeons we talked about. Police officers, particularly those who respond to problems at night, or someone who is forced to respond with no backup. These kinds of things bring it out in us. And if you survive in that employment long enough, you begin to rely on it. The hidden secret is nobody ever wants to value that anywhere above or equal to what they spend huge amounts of money to learn in education, from their religion, from their teachers, from their parents, from their cultural background, all those things it becomes subservient to. So yeah, there's no relying on it. Nobody relies on it unless they're immersed in it. Almost without exception, the people who have come to me for help are the people where they have some either life and death issue, like a missing child that they are not getting support in finding, or something that they need answers to that they can't get answers for, and no one else will help them. And I get that problem. An example would be uh, the missing child is a good example. That's a life and death. If I don't find my child, I've had a couple things I've worked on in the past 10 years, probably, which were very, very meaningful to me, but they failed. They didn't fail because of the viewing. They failed because of the use of it. Um, there was an 8-year-old girl who disappeared, and like always, the local folks came and left a note under my windshield wiper. I was giving a talk to, I think, 28 people at that moment. It was 9 o'clock, 9:30 at night. And I came out from the talk around 11, and I looked at the note under my windshield, and it said, "Missing 8-year-old went out at 12 noon with a light jacket and shorts and 2 dogs. The dogs came home. She didn't. And the problem was it was 15 December. The temperature was dropping from a nice 55, 58 degrees to around 30 and was continuing to go down. And so her exposure alone was going to kill her. So I went to the site, and the rescue trailer was there with all, the yellow tape, all the stuff. And I picked up a map and I put an X on the map and said, "Go there right now and you will find her." And I started to go under the tape to give it to the sheriff because that's what I always did. And a deputy stopped me and he said, "I'm sorry, Joe, the new sheriff wants nothing to do with psychics." And I said, "Just give him no, I can't give him anything and say it's from a psychic." I said, "Okay, give it to him and say it's from a manhunter or something." He wouldn't take it. So I stood there until 2 a.m. in the morning, and the game warden came by who knew me from years, and I had helped him capture some poachers once. And he said, "What are you doing here?" And I told him, and he said, "Give me your map. I'll make sure he sees it." So I gave him my map. 7 a.m. the next morning, I got a phone call. "Report to the search trailer," which I did. The sheriff wanted to arrest me because they went to the X that morning and found her sneakers and her jacket. The only way I could know it was there is if I put it there. From that point on, all I could say was, "I want a lawyer." That lasted for about 3 hours. The game warden came into the trailer and saw me sitting there and asked what I was doing there. And the sheriff told him, and he went off on the sheriff and explained when she had vanished originally, I was talking to 28 people, more or less. So he said, "Well, how was I supposed to know? You wouldn't answer me." And he said, "Well, you're trying to incarcerate him. Why would he?" And then he asked me, he said, oh, I gave him a phone number to call in Washington. So he called the phone number and got his butt chewed pretty good. And then he said, "All right, if you're so smart, where is she now?" And I went over to the search grid and I put my finger on it. It was the very bottom of the search grid. And I said, "Right here." And I put an X. I actually marked the X on the wood of the wall. And he said, "Oh, no. Now we have to change the search grid." And I said, "No, you don't. I know exactly where that is. Let's just go in and get her." "No, we got to change the search grid. And then we have to send in the dog teams for scent. And we can't have anybody in there with the dog teams." So they did all of that. That's 4 more hours. Now we're in the midday of the second day. And he finally succumbed to the idea, with pressure from the game warden, to go look. So he sent 2 teams in. It was a canyon area. He had them go in from both ends. They had to rope in because there's no place to land the helicopter. So they went in from both ends, and I marked both maps with my X, and I told them, both teams, I said, go to this location where the X is as fast as you can. Look while you go, but get there. So they went there. There was nothing there, so they started searching the area. And about 70 yards away, in a little alcove of this canyon, they found her face down. They rolled her over, and she was dead. But there was no lividity, which meant she was dead probably less than an hour and a half. Now, I won't tell you where I went in my head with that, but it wasn't a kind place. The military in me wanted to have a small chat with the sheriff, and I chose to get in my truck and go home. And I have to tell you, it's that kind of thing that really, really bugs me. They may not like psychics because a lot of psychics are full of crap. However, if there's the most remote chance of finding someone, why wouldn't you take it? It I don't understand that. And that's why it just I don't like getting into the why or why not argument because it upsets me a great deal because I've seen too much of the why not. And it's usually based on stupidity. And it's sad. So other people, I get calls from sheriffs sometimes, missing child. And once I was in Las Vegas or something, I got a call. I told them where to go and what to do, and they called me back and said, look, it's a 7-year-old or a 5-year-old. I can't remember now, but they never go uphill. My deputy went to some kind of a place where he took a lesson on missing kids, and kids that young, under 10, I think it was, never go uphill. I told her just go do it herself then. So they did, and they went uphill and they found the kid. His father told him, if you ever get lost, go to the nearest light and wait for me. The only light was on the back of an unoccupied cabin. They had left the back light, the back door light on. And so the kid went uphill and fell asleep on the back of the cabin porch. So it's like, where do you go with that? It makes you tired. You know, I've known people like the American Dowsing Association, and I'm sure you have dowsers in Canada that are experts that are really good. Normally they find water, but I have known the ex-president of the American Dowsers Association, Leroy Bull, for a long time. And Leroy Bull did some dowsing that I witnessed on television in Japan. It is the best I've ever seen in my life. He never makes a mistake. But I'm sure he's put up with the same stuff I have. And it doesn't surprise me that he doesn't do it anymore. Last time I talked to him, he retired. You just get tired after a while of fighting the uphill battle, you know, the crazy battle.